So I'm going to lead off a little bit here about omnichannel in particular for startups. So what is omnichannel marketing? Omnichannel is actually different than multi-channel, and people get them mixed up. So multi-channel simply means that you market on different platforms. Omnichannel, the big difference is that your messaging is coordinated. And if you're wondering if there's a right or wrong answer, generally speaking, omnichannel is the right answer to what should my marketing plan be, not multi-channel, but a lot of people are doing multi-channel and calling it omnichannel. So you'll see a theme here about consistency in your journey, and that you're in marketing, you're typically taking a core message. This is what we're all about. This is our service. And you need to carry that through all of your vehicles consistently. So this is something too, I find this tool a very useful thing. And if you want to dive into this, and really, if you're not a marketing background person, but you want to learn to think like a marketer, Google or ChatGPT or whatever your search preferred vehicle is, the consumer consumption chain for B2B, for B2C. This is a really simple version for today, but there are some really complicated models for the consumption chain. And it's a way to think through what they call now as customer journey. But this has been around for 40 years. This is a classic model that it looks at, like, how do your consumers become aware of the need? And in some cases, they don't even know they have the need. You know, you're so innovative, they're not sitting around thinking, oh, I need X, because they don't even know that if they knew about it, they would have the need. But then you've got that challenge. In those instances, your marketing should focus up front, educating them on the need, and then introducing yourself as the solution. If it's an existing need, I'm thirsty, I would like a beverage, whatever. So if they already have a need, it's a defined need, then your marketing will typically focus in getting into their consideration set, getting into their refrigerator in the beverage example, and being considered. One of the things that's important to understand is, especially when I hear people say, I have no competition, you have to look at how do they solve the problem today. That's your competition. So it's a really important question in the consumption chain. Do they even know they have a need? Are they aware of the need? How do they become aware of the need? Once they know they have the need, how do they solve that problem today? And in some cases, it goes unsolved. Selection. How are they selecting? Where do they shop? How do they shop? Is it last minute? Do they literally, sometimes what they do is decide, I'm going to go onto Amazon and look for X, or I'm going to go to Home Depot, or I'm using some consumer examples, but I'm trying to keep it kind of to a generic common language here. But how do they look for products? Where do they go? Where do they source products? And so it gives you other clues about where you should be doing your marketing. Consumption. Now, this is the part that people don't normally think about being in marketing, but this is where you get into your brand experience. So they take it home. How long was the shelf life? You ever have something where you wanted to eat it and you get so upset because you paid good money for it and then it expired before you got to eat it? And it was your fault, but you're still mad, like, and you throw it out. So that's a problem that can happen in the consumption if you're not visible. And so you kind of think about their consumption process. What were the positives and negatives? For software, how easy was it to download? How well did it integrate into my other products? Did I have, what was the setup? So thinking through, once they make the purchase, how do they actually consume and use your products, and are there any barriers? And then storage, disposal, repurchase. This is kind of a broader bucket. But this really goes into, after they have used your product, what reminds them to use it again? So they downloaded your app, but how many apps have you ever downloaded and they just never used again? So how do you get them to reuse, continue to use, etc.? Any questions on that? Sort of weird for me behind a podium. Suddenly I'm like a teacher. Class. Okay, so this, yes. Oh, hello, online people. Oh, excellent. Welcome, live streaming people. Okay, so now let's get into how to build your omnichannel marketing plan. So first is to deeply understand your customers. This feeds a little bit back to that consumption chain, not just their demographics, but really dive into their pain points. Where do they hang out? And usually hanging out is a reference to their social media behaviors, but it can also be, depending on your product, where do they hang out in real life? So where do the conversations happen about your product? Where do going back to that thing in the consumption chain, how do they know they have a need? Very often the need is defined in these hanging out environments. What problems are they trying to solve? So there's a great quote in marketing that people don't buy drills, they buy quarter-inch holes. So, so sorry, Ron, didn't mean to make you laugh in the middle of that. So the thing here is like it's you've heard of like jobs to be done research. There's a lot of different ways to think about this, but understanding your customer is not just my customer is a male age 35 to 45. It is like, and what's going on in their life? What are their problems? What are their challenges? And really understanding that. And how do they like to engage? You know, are they strictly text, et cetera? So those will start to give you some clues. Get in the mind of your consumer. This step, so those first two steps, right? That consumption chain and deeply understanding your customers, that foundation needs to be built before you dive into what channel should I be on. That's a lot of times people, when I'm helping with their marketing plan, they'll say, should I be on TikTok? Should I be on Facebook? It's like, well, I don't know. What are you trying to do? Who are you trying to reach? What are their problems? Where are they having their conversations? So looking at your channels, B2B, B2C, we'll dive into this a little bit more later. And again, of course, you'll get all these slides, but where understanding your audience will help you choose the right channels. So creating a consistent brand experience. This goes back a little bit to that difference between multi-channel and omnichannel. In omnichannel, what is absolutely critical is that the consumers have a consistent experience, same or similar messaging. Doesn't mean you use the same tagline everywhere, but they should have a sense of what you're all about, what your benefits are. Those should be consistent. And the other thing too is sometimes it can be little visual indicators, such as your colors, your schemes, your look and feel, some of the things people talk about with branding, to make sure that they know instantly this is coming from you. And then using AI and automation for scale. So that we'll talk more, obviously, a big topic for today. And you can't get into a marketing trend session without talking about AI, and we'll have a lot of it today. But really looking at marketing in terms of AI-driven and AI optimization. Okay. And then finally, test, iterate, and optimize. So there can be especially in a startup, it can be easy to just say, okay, I've plugged in my model, I've hired my agency, I've got my media plan for the next year. It is super easy to set and forget if you've got 100 other priorities. But I would encourage you, ideally weekly, and at the very least once a month, to sit down with your marketing person and take a serious look at the numbers and understand your metrics. And to even understand those, if you go all the way back to that consumption chain, why I live and die by that model is because how you set your metrics, what your measurements are, should be tied back to what behavior you're trying to train. So again, if your whole thing is to make people aware of the problem, then it's awareness. You want to look at your numbers that are awareness driving numbers. If you're trying to just steal market share, then you're looking at lead conversions and things like that. So you have to think about what really, don't just automatically say, oh, it's ROAS and CAC and kind of the normal numbers. Really think about setting your measurements based on what you're trying to train people on. And then lastly, before I'm going to take you through I'm going to pause there and see if you had any questions on those phases of the plan. So we have understand your customer, prioritize your channels based on the customer, be consistent with your brand, using AI to automate it and help you with that process. But while you're using automation, don't just set and forget. Any questions on that? Okay.
Hello, Internet people. So when you're using different channels, are there some channels you use to build more top of the funnel attention, and then do you push them towards others, or do you have like a cyclical kind of I guess, rhythm with these channels where they all, I guess, look to, I guess, push clients towards making a call to action? That's my question, right? Like, how do the channels work together most of the time when you see them? Is it like a big funnel and each channel plays a different part of the funnel?
Yeah, and when you're a startup, you invariably tend to have your cohort of customers, if you will, moving through probably in the same sequence. So if you're in a new company, everybody coming in, or almost everybody's going to be top of funnel. And so it's almost easier because you can paper the market with the same sort of categories of marketing. Everybody's learning about your product. Now you're starting to move into, after 6 months in the market, now you're going to start trying to convert. So it's easier actually in an early stage brand to, or a startup, to assume that your customers are all in the same space in the funnel. And to your point, yes, you would use different channels. And I'm going to dive into a little bit more when I get to the social media piece. But it depends on, obviously, B2B, B2C, they have very, very different channels in terms of awareness building and lead generation. Where it gets complicated is on a brand after you've been in the market for a few years and you're trying to track and segment who's still in awareness, as people start to move through the funnel, being able to track where they are on the funnel. That's where, whether it's a CRM, whatever tools you're using to track your customers become important, retargeting, et cetera. So there's a lot that you can do to begin to track where the customers are and start to apply different motivations to them as they move through. Great question. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so I'll go through the 5 common mistakes. Trying to be everywhere too soon. Omnichannel also does not mean every channel. So omnichannel, 2 is omni. All right, so for your brand, and honestly, while we talk about omni, sometimes 1 is fine. Especially in B2B, sometimes all you want to do is a drip email campaign or LinkedIn for lead generation. So don't assume that the right answer is, if I'm only using 1, I'm doing it wrong. But as you begin to move out to multiple channels, especially for an emerging brand or a startup, I recommend starting with, I say 2 to 3, but honestly it could be 1 to 3 high impact channels where your audience is most active. Master those channels before moving on. So don't have the temptation that I need to be everywhere, despite what your ad agency tells you. I've got a lot of posters up in my office, but another one is there's a Buddhist saying that if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so if you ask your agency where should I be, they're going to recommend the biggest, most complicated, and potentially most expensive marketing plan they can give to you. Just in case you're curious, they have a motivated to put you in a lot of places, it's okay to push back and just say I only want to be in a couple of spaces or in 1 space is completely appropriate. Treating every channel as a separate entity. And this kind of goes along with what we were talking about, having them integrated, but one of the biggest things I see where there's a split is, here's my social media campaign, and then that oftentimes people will be fairly cohesive. And then over here is my email campaign. And then over here we're doing events. And where the breaks usually happen is who's in charge of it. Very rarely does somebody have an integrated process, especially a young company may have their agency and then maybe one of the co-founders is running the email campaign. So look for points of confusion that you need to manage, or where you need to maintain consistency is if you have different entities or different people managing those programs. Make sure that, and it's not just the messaging is the same. Think about it where it fits in the sequence. You do an ad, you direct them to a call to action, you capture them into your CRM. Now you need to start emailing them and understand where they come back in the channel. So you have to look at how these different campaigns also interact with each other, and not just look at, here's my social media funnel, my email funnel, and other events funnel. Sometimes those operate as independent funnels. Over-reliance on paid ads. I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but people often look at paid and organic as the two buckets. But first-party data collection, to me, should always be a huge priority for startups. The most classic thing, sign up for our newsletter, sign up for an offer, run a campaign, whatever you're doing where you're driving them somewhere where they have to input a phone number for an SMS with permission, don't get sued, phone mail, email, whatever. And make sure that you're capturing that and make that part of when you're not sure what the call to action is, or you're a young company and it feels a little too early to say, buy it. Sometimes that's too aggressive of a call to action out of the gate. A great call to action is something that captures their name, email, interest, etc. Over automation without personalization. So this goes back to, as we look at, there's a tendency to, again, want to sort of set and forget things. Or you're nodding. I'm seeing somebody else's. I've seen a lot of nods in the audience. Like it's so. If that's something people have had experience with.
Yeah, I just like don't think your audience is stupid. You know what I mean? It's like we're
right.
all sick of it and like.
Yeah, who can tell when they've got an AI generated email?
It's not worth it.
Yeah, it's not, absolutely not. And it can get overwhelming. You're not going to have to personalize everything, but if you're doing an outreach campaign, say especially with a B2B application, and you have 300 or 400 people on your list that you're hammering with a drip campaign, pull out 10 or 20% and send them, maybe you can't do them all, but get your highest and most important leads and send them a personal email. It'll blow their minds. If you actually say something about their company, hey, I saw an article the other day about how you guys are doing X, and I'd love to talk to you more about Y. It just stuns them if they suddenly realize it's a human being. I've actually had to joke with people like, this is a person, when they respond. So bring that human touch in where you can. And then this goes a little bit back to the whole thing. I see a lot of companies fail to set KPIs, or maybe more commonly set the KPIs to just standard things without really tying back to what is their key business model. One of the companies we're working with, Zesty Bakers, that they're a marketplace, and marketplace valuation and metrics are all CAC for the most part. You know, lifetime value and CAC, but that is critical when your whole job is to basically deliver customers cost effectively to your marketplace of entities. Then that's what you're being measured on, but that doesn't mean that's the right measurement for everybody. Sometimes you're strictly building awareness. So just make sure that you're really thinking through what are the right measurements of the behavior you're trying to drive. Now, I have 10 minutes for questions, but so far so long. Okay, yes. Oh, come to the mic, Divya. This is Divya. She's the CEO of Zesty Bakers.
So you talked of metrics. This is on? Yeah. So you talked about metrics, but then especially for startups, I'm guessing most people here are from the startup world. So how soon is too soon to write off that something is not working? Because sometimes you got to give it time.
Are you saying your marketing person's ever wrong?
Yes. I'm a marketing person, often wrong.
That's a really good question. I think it depends a little bit on each channel. So if it's awareness building, it can be months. So kind of a rule of 3 that I use. People need to be touched 3 to 5 times with a message if you're building awareness before they're not going, oh, that whatever. They could remember at least your name and a rudimentary sense of what you are. You live and die this brand every day, but they are not dying necessarily to jump out of their chair and buy your product. So in awareness building, it can be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. Typically, if you're just trying to drive awareness. Context is important too. How unique are you? How much are you getting them to stop and notice you? How impactful is your advertising? Things like engagement rate is a good sense. If you're doing your campaigns and you have very high engagement rates, it typically is an indicator that you're getting attention. It's not a perfect measurement, but high engagement usually means you've got some stopping power to your ads. In those instances, you're more like probably 3 times that they notice you, and it'll take a while. If your engagement is really low, that's an indicator of how impactful that theme is to your creative. And so there's 2 things you might move on from. One is platforms, and the other is themes. So you may be on the right platform. Like, we believe in Instagram, sometimes the ads work, sometimes they don't. And so in those instances, you're saying, how long before I move on from a message versus, I don't care what we do on TikTok, it's not landing. Then you're thinking about, should we just delete that platform? Before you do the campaigns, that's also why you kind of think through who is your customer, because then there's a lot of data out there on how well the different platforms line up to those customers and what you should be seeing. So it's like the old, the breaking up thing. It's not me, it's you. Or it's not you, it's me, or whichever way the story flows. But is it the platform or is it your content? And so that's it's a great question. But if you've built the campaign out, the demographics aligned to your customer, it should be working. That's when I would start leaning into some A/B testing, test or A, B, C, D, E, F, G testing of different themes, and give it some time. It's 30 social media. I tell 90 days is a good time. Like, try different things, do some testing. Usually it takes about 90 days to know if something is working, but it varies a lot by channel. Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please. Oh, I know you're not going to get away with it. Just so that the people back home can hear us.
You made a valid point about giving the time, the 90 days, for many of these things to work, because oftentimes people are changing too soon and not really getting the ultimate working solution that they're looking for when they don't have that patience. I think that's something that startup founders have a tough time understanding, because they're in this fast pace of getting everything done, seeing the results on a daily basis.
Yep.
That's something that I think we all need to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
For any
Absolutely.
of these campaigns to be effective.
No, it's a great point, and selecting your channel, not to back up too much farther, but some channels are more difficult than others. That's where, if your product, for example, is Amazon friendly, a lot of people like to launch on Amazon, because you could get up on Amazon and turn the marketing on very quickly, and the purchase is right next to the awareness. Okay, the amount of time there's this I forgot all about it time. So you could see an ad for something, and if you go to the store 3 or 5 days later, what's the probability you're going to remember that? So the greater distance between when you see the ad and when you're in a position to make a purchase, the longer probability someone's going to forget about it.
Yeah, and also adding that call to action, option right away will solve that problem on any platform these days, because they're all, sending you to wherever, the stakeholders wanting to connect.
Yeah.
Right? So
you bring up a really good point, is call to action. And people often think of call to action as a paid only thing. It's in everything. There's a call to action on your package. Everything, every bit of communication should tell people what you want them, direct them somewhere. Here's what I want you to think or believe. So think about your organic. It doesn't, just because you can't measure it, just because there isn't a button to click on like you have in paid, doesn't mean you don't put the call to action on the marketing. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Oh, suddenly a flurry of questions. I love it.
So I'm in a unique situation for my product. It's a video game. And part of trying to get funding is we actually have to do the marketing and stuff before we even have a product.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So,
buzz building.
Yeah, exactly. So my question is, how often do we need to be touching base with the folks that do get in our email list, our Discord channel, our Discord server, all that sort of thing?
Oh, that is a great question. Again, these are broad generalizations, but think about it almost like a sine curve, that you want to. What you want to do, depending on how you're spending. If you're blasting out in a mass, you can just be touching mass channels one way. But if you have like a cost per interaction for whatever channel you're selecting, then what you want to do is use your earlier marketings, 3-6 months out when you start, see if you can't begin to segment the customers a bit by level of interest, response rates. Drop something, a little something out there for them to react to. Try to start building that database of them with some sort of call to action. And then that way, then you get closer and closer. It's not that you're touching all of them more and more. What you want to do is start segmenting that funnel. And the closer you get, you want to find that 20% and just start hammering them into oblivion until they say uncle, more or less. But anyway, on that note.